welcome to this week's rant. And yeah, I am doing it out here purely because at the moment we're still cleaning the space out there, but I will be moving in there later to do some more stuff today. But this is the Sunday morning rant. This rant is about Behringer's social media feeds this week. But before we get going, we need to crack on with parish notices. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel, why not? Hit the subscribe icon. If you want to be notified when videos like this or about gear like this hit the channel, you know what? That's the bell icon. If you like the contents of the video, give it a thumbs up. It really helps. If you don't, you know, I do this for fun. Finally, for less than a cup of coffee, support the channel, support the production of videos, join the TMGG community. The address is down there, as are the Instagram and Patreon feeds. But now, back to that video. Before we get going, a thank you. Thank you to those people that sent me get well messages. So the reason why there hasn't been anything on the channel, posted on the channel for the last week or so, is because I haven't been feeling very well. I put out a video on Instagram on Friday morning saying that I hadn't been feeling very well, had a lack of energy. Don't think it's corona, just a complete lack of energy. And a number of you wrote back and said, get well soon. So thank you very much for giving a damn. Most people in this life don't give a damn at the moment. So thank you very much. Anyway, that's not what this video is about. The second thing, before I get to what the video is about, is I'm trying a new camera setup. So I said on the Instagram feed the other day I was trying out the new camera, and the new camera is there. Well, I'm looking at the new camera. And what I've kind of done is I've got two cameras actually videoing me at the moment, basically from the same position. One is giving me this sort of wide angle shot, and the other one is giving me this tight shot on my top half. Now I'm not quite sure how this is going to work, to be honest. So this is kind of the first video I've tried this with, but I am trying out a new camera setup. I'm trying out a new camera setup and trying out a new microphone setup. So I've actually got this mic, which is the stable mic I always use, which is the headset. And then I've got a new Rode mic, which is out of shot up here. Now, theoretically, the shotgun mic that is up there should give me as good a sound quality as this thing gives me. And it just gives me a bit more flexibility. I'll still use this thing because this is far better for when I turn away from camera. Because when you turn away from camera, of course, you're projecting your voice in a different direction, and this turns with me. So this is much better for when you're doing sort of bench type stuff. But when I'm just doing sort of videos to camera like this, it might be easier in the future with the shotgun. And easier to set up and pull down as well. So that's two things completely unrelated to this video that we've done. Anyway, so if you've missed, or if you've been living in some sort of hobbit hole for the last week, you may have missed that since Christmas, Behringer have been announcing super partnership relationships on social media. So, you know, they've basically been going around the various patches that they operate, or territories they operate into, and announcing with key distributors that they've got these super partnerships. I'm not quite sure what a super partnership is in addition to the way they normally supply, but I think it's a way of making sure that these partners in the various territories actually hold stock locally. So my favourite toy shop in Guildford, they've been announced. The German powerhouse Thomann, they've been announced. Sweetwater was announced a number of weeks ago. These are all, I suspect, designed to coincide with what would have been NAMM last week, but of course NAMM got canned because the world is in lockdown because of COVID-19. And you know, one of the interesting things about this I'll come on to NAMM in a separate video, I think, but it's really interesting that I really even though I've been watching social media and I've been watching a load of live shows and what have you being put on, I've not really seen very many announcements as part of NAMM. I was expecting to see certain things be announced, and I'll talk about that in a separate video, but I haven't really seen that. Anyway, so obviously, while we're on the subject of travel, I had to tell my my suitcases that there would be no international travel this year. So unfortunately, I'm dealing with a case of emotional baggage now. Sorry, I saw that this morning. I thought I had to put that in. I was going to put the Paddy and Murphy joke in I saw this morning, which was brilliant. It was all about accents and phrasing, but I sort of thought better of that one. But anyway, so again, what does the super partnership actually mean? I think it's just a way of making sure that Behringer can get stock rather than having to ship stock all the time from the factory. And I think probably with the whole COVID-19 thing and the movement of things around the world, as Brad over at Isla Instruments will tell you, you either have to pay for things to come express or things are getting delayed for various reasons. Hence the reason why a lot of you are still waiting for 2400s. I mean, they're coming off the production line like a rate of knots, but he has been hit by stuff moving around the world because I think his circuit boards were made in China. Anyway, I digress. So, reading between the lines, why have they been setting up these super partnerships? If I was a betting man, I would say there is a lot more to come from Behringer this year. So where do we think we're going to go? What are the immediate synths do we think are going to hit the market? Excuse me. So about 4 or 5 days ago, we've known that Behringer have been working on an OBXA clone. It's been kind of common knowledge since about the middle of last year. Their Manchester Skunk Works let it out of the bag. But about 4 or 5 days ago, Behringer posted on social media that they were pushing the units out to beta test. So what does this mean? Well, firstly, it means that the Manchester Skunk Works have finished work on the firmware. So this is the code that runs the synth. Now remember, in days of old, you would have had an EEPROM, you would have burnt an EEPROM, and that effectively was the code that ran the synth. But it was a you put chip in board, and if you wanted to update it, you almost had to take chip out of board and burn a new one. Nowadays, everything is being run on this sort of kind of firmware concept, which is where you can just flash the firmware and put a new version on, which is brilliant. But that's the first thing. The firmware has been completed. So, if the firmware's been completed, what else do we have? Well, the second thing is they've built 100 units. So that means that the circuitry for hosting the firmware, the keyboard, the user interface in terms of the buttons and knobs and the key bed, they've all been built too. So that means that there are 100 units that have been built, firmware has been flashed onto them, which means the final circuitry design has been done. So that means the OBX, or the UBXA as it's called, it's not the OBXA, and I'll come on to that in a minute, but the UBXA is basically, from a design and build point of view, complete. We're now into beta testing the firmware, so we're looking for bugs and trying to find out if there's any hardware issues with the designs thus far. But in order to get to beta test, you would have to gone through alpha test, and alpha test is all about testing the sort of the rotary components, the keyboard components, the sound parts, all that sort of stuff. So we now have a complete unit. They've also stated that in order to become a beta tester, you've had to either have own, or have intimate knowledge of the OBXA. So what they're really doing at this point in time is looking for people who understand the platform. And those people who understand the platform are the ones they push the 100 units out for testing. So really what they're trying to do at this point is really have a critical eye on what did the original do and what does the new one do, or the reimagined version. It also means that they have, in order to be able to test the original against the new one, they've also had to have had to have programmed, should I say, the bass sounds for the synth. So they've all been done as well. A number of them, I suspect, have been done. I suspect that there will be sound designers who will be prepping specialist banks of sounds for the UBXA going forward. But originally, I mean, you're buying a UBXA because you want the OBXA and you can't afford an OBXA, so you're going to buy the Behringer clone. So really what you're looking for is the same bass sound set on the UBXA that you got on the OBXA. Now, the other thing to bear in mind with the UBXA is, like with all the other Behringer pieces of equipment, this is not a direct clone, it's a reimagined box. So the first thing is it's software driven, which means you can load sounds on and off effectively, either, I don't know at the moment whether it's got a flash card on it, whether you can just put an SD card in the back of it or just dump them up and down via MIDI. No idea on how that works at the moment, but that will be available to us. Obviously, functionality can be added to the synth going forward based on user feedback, based on beta tester feedback. Brilliant. But the big thing about this synth over the original, of course, is the fact that the original effectively only allowed you to play one patch, whereas this will have a dual mode, which will allow you to play two patches simultaneously or separately. As in, you could have another keyboard playing the second patch, is the way I understand this functionality. So that is the UBXA that is coming to market later this year. And I suspect the fact it's gone out to beta test and they've got 100 units built, I would imagine that is looking to hit the streets in spring. So the second one that we know is going to hit the streets this year, and it's one that's been long awaited for, and the post was either yesterday or Friday, I can't remember which it was, but that was reintroducing the RD9. Now, again, a reimagined of the classic TR9 Roland drum machine. Now, we all thought, I say we collectively, we all thought that the RD9 would pretty much hit the ground shortly after the RD8. It was introduced in 2019. And that wasn't the case, and that wasn't the case for a number of reasons. We saw lots of videos of the TR9 being put through its paces by various beta testers around the time of the release of the RD8, and actually before the release of the RD8. So there was a lot of hype that it was going to be released pretty soon thereafter. Most people thinking around sort of either would have been at NAUM last year or shortly thereafter. But most of us do know that the initial release of the RD8 had issues with the firmware, and those issues with the firmware were significant enough for Behringer to pull the release of the RD9. And they took a lot of stick on social media because of the fact they pulled the RD9. So I'm not going to get into the whys or wherefores, whether it was a good idea or it was a bad idea, but they did. That's what they did. It's history. Hindsight's a wonderful thing. Now, what Behringer did tell us about the time they pulled the release of the RD9 is that the RD9 and the RD8 share a lot of the core firmware code. So effectively, it's a very similar engine that drives both these drum machines, effectively with a different user interface and sound set across the two units. But effectively, it's the bit that sits underneath this is the same core firmware code. Now, this is not unusual where we are at the moment in terms of releasing clones or reimagined units. Roland have pretty much released the entire boutique range based on the same concept. There is a core firmware set of firmware code for the whole thing, and then sitting on top of that is a different user interface and a different sound engine, not sound engine, sound bank, should we say, for the instrument they're releasing it for. So the TR09, the TR08 are the Behringer, the Roland boutique drum machines, but there's the Jupiter 8, there's the Juno 106, there's the Juno 6. There's a number of other units that have been released along the same lines, including the little mini D50 that I use quite a lot. It's actually sitting around here somewhere, and I was just looking to grab it, and it's not within grabbable distance. So Roland have done the same thing. I think in the early days of their firm release, they had a number of issues with the core firmware, but they managed to sort that out quite quickly without it blowing up in their face like it has for Behringer. Should it have blown up in the face for Behringer? I think people were looking for an excuse, if I'm honest. So I'm not going to go into any more on that. It is not basically a shock that it has taken time to sort the firmware out for the RD8, and they kind of kept quiet on the RD9 despite sort of many people on social media saying, well, where's the RD9? I want the RD9. And they've kind of kept that close to their chest until they sorted out the firmware for the RD8. And I think they've pretty much just about done that. So basically now it looks like the RD9 is going to be dropping, and I suspect based on what we're seeing, it might even be this side of Easter that the RD9 drops. I suspect Behringer had a lot of the cases and the circuitry probably sitting in warehouses since early last year, expecting the release last year. So they probably would have ramped up the hardware construction to meet demand, and then obviously when they pulled it, all this stuff has been diverted to warehouse. So I suspect sitting in a warehouse somewhere is all these units, and what they will then do is pull them out of the warehouse, unbox them, flash them, box them up, and ship them out to the partners so that the likes of you and I can get hold of them. So that's 2 synths we know about that are going to drop in the first half of this year. What else has Behringer got in line for us? We wonder. So there we have it. 2 synths we know about that Behringer are going to be dropping. They've been quietly released on social media. I don't think they've made a massive fanfare. But there have been other announcements on their social media feed since Christmas, like the fact that their Wing mixer, which I really do like the look of. I love the look of the Wing mixer. Unfortunately, I've got no place for it and no money to buy it at the moment. So, but they've announced that the Wing is now going to support Dante as an interface source. So that looks like they're moving the Wing in the right direction. There's appears to be a number of different things that have been started to be launched this year. There's another Eurorack module I saw the other day. They've relaunched a expression pedal and a couple of other bits and bobs. So they've really started to sort of ramp up what they're doing. So the question is, how much are they going to be ramping up this year? So the super partnership agreements look like they're ramping up their supply stream and their routes to market. I have to be honest and say there are many in the world that don't like Behringer's stance and ethics. I'm not going to even talk about those, so forgive me for that. I don't want to get into an ethical stance on this channel about Behringer. My view is, and always has been, well, definitely for the last couple of years, that Behringer are giving people the products that they've been asking for that the other major manufacturers have been ignoring them for. That's kind of what I think. I did a video a while ago about, Behringer give the people what they want. So if the people are asking for, we want an 808 drum machine, will Behringer give you the RD8, similar size, same sort of layout, same sort of functionality, but with modern electronics. A lot of people are arguing about the whole sort of, this is not their IP. They shouldn't be doing it. It's cloning. One of the things I will say about when Behringer have looked at the stuff that they've done, they haven't done a direct clone. It's not a complete direct one-for-one copy. There are lots of things that they have built into their new instruments, that some of which should have been there in the first place by the original manufacturer but haven't been. And others are stuff you would expect from a modern instrument. They've been, in a lot of instances, I kind of think they've nicely integrated this stuff in. And I think, Behringer didn't come up with this cloning concept. There have been clones of classic instruments around for a number of years. I think the issue has always been is that the companies that have been making these clones are small enough that the big manufacturers weren't really worried about them. I think what Yuri has done is he's entered the market, seen a space, started making these instruments, and it's made the bigger manufacturers take up and take stock and say, well, hang on a minute, that was our instrument, and somebody else is now profiting. I don't know if profiting the right word, is using it, has built an instrument that's close enough that it could be seen to be our instrument, but it's not. It has enough differences that it's not a clone. But it has made a number of manufacturers look at their back catalogues and look at the instruments that are changing hands for a lot of money and say, should we really be bringing these instruments bang up to date? I think we're going to see more of this coming this year. I don't know what else is going to come out. With the big announcement that the UBXA is hitting beta, Behringer again asked on social media, what's next? And guys, this is kind of your chance to actually, write to Behringer if you're so inclined and say, I'd like to see one of these. I've put my request in. I'd love to see a Jupiter 4. I have to be honest. I don't necessarily feel that I want a Jupiter 8. I know a lot of people say they want a Jupiter 8, but I think a Jupiter 8, I'm not sure that I would want a Jupiter 8 now, because I think, I've got a Jupiter 80, and I've got a System 8. So I've got a number of routes to Jupiter 8, and I've got the boutique one as well, which is the JU8, is it? No, JP8, sorry. So do I want a Jupiter 8? Probably not, but I think something like a Jupiter 4 or Jupiter 6, something that hasn't been done, that could be interesting. A classic Yamaha CS, that would be interesting as well. There are a number of classic synths out there. Maybe even a retrospective Hammond or a Rhodes keyboard. They might be interesting. Anyway, so guys, it's your chance to push that. Go on the social media feed and look at and say what you want. Because if you don't say what you want, the answer is you ain't going to get it. And the other thing to look at on the social media feeds from Behringer is the fact that they have been teasing us with some concept logic boards. Now, I saw one not that long ago, probably just before Christmas, and the logic board looked very much like another drum machine that they've been working on. And I'm not sure I would say it's the DMX, but it could be a Lin style drum machine. It was a concept art. It's obviously been done in some sort of 3D package of how the board might look when it's fully furnished, but they obviously haven't got a cover on it. And the other one I saw, which I can't find now, I saw it a couple of days ago actually, was a board for a synthesizer. And I'm thinking it might be a 4-operator synthesizer, and the reason I say that is because if you look at the board itself, there's 4 clusters of components which would seem to indicate that there's for something on it. So if you looked at the original sort of synthesizers, a lot of the voice cards were clustered into, for argument's sake, the Juno 6, you saw the voice cards on the board. So I'm wondering whether we've got something like that up their sleeve or something like that they're looking at the moment. We know that they're looking at some. There's another one coming. Just don't know what it is. Anyway, guys, until next time, live long and prosper. Bye-bye.